If you enjoyed this audiobook, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Chapter 1, The Spark of Purpose. Part 1, Why Stories Matter. Stories act as bridges between abstract ideas and human understanding, creating connections that facts alone never achieve. When Howard Schultz transformed Starbucks from a small Seattle coffee bean retailer into a global phenomenon, he didn't lead with market research or profit projections. Instead, he told a story about his trip to Italy, where he witnessed how coffee bars created community gathering spaces. This narrative became the foundation for Starbucks' entire culture and mission. The human brain processes stories differently than data. Neuroscientist Paul Zak discovered that character-driven stories with emotional arcs increase oxytocin production, the hormone responsible for empathy and trust. This explains why employees rally behind leaders who share personal experiences rather than those who simply present spreadsheets. When Southwest Airlines faced financial crisis in 2001, CEO Herb Kelleher didn't send corporate memos. He shared stories of the airline's early days, reminding employees how they built something special together through previous challenges. Stories create what psychologists call narrative transportation, the phenomenon where listeners become so absorbed they temporarily lose awareness of their surroundings. This mental state makes people more open to new ideas and perspectives. Jim Collins found in his Good to Great research that Level 5 leaders consistently used personal anecdotes to illustrate company values, making abstract concepts tangible for their teams. Consider how John F. Kennedy communicated America's moon landing vision. He didn't discuss rocket specifications or budget allocations. Instead, he told a story about exploration, pioneering spirit, and national destiny that resonated across demographic lines. The narrative gave meaning to the technical challenges ahead. Effective leaders understand that people remember stories, not statistics. When Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, he shared his personal journey as a father of a special needs child, explaining how it changed his perspective on empathy and inclusion. This story became central to Microsoft's cultural transformation, helping employees understand why the company needed to shift from a competitive to collaborative mindset. Stories also serve as decision-making tools. They provide frameworks for evaluating choices against core values. When faced with difficult decisions, leaders can ask whether proposed actions align with their organizational narrative. This storytelling approach transforms abstract visions into shared experiences that guide behavior long after meetings end. Part 2. Discovering your why. The moment you identify your deeper purpose, leadership transforms from a job into a calling. Most leaders stumble through their careers chasing external validation, promotions, or financial targets without ever asking the fundamental question that shapes extraordinary leadership. Yet research from organizational psychologist Adam Grant shows that purpose-driven leaders are 30% more effective at retaining talent and significantly outperform their peers in long-term results. The secret lies not in what they do, but in understanding why they do it. Purpose discovery often emerges during life's most challenging moments. Consider Howard Schultz's transformation of Starbucks after growing up in poverty. Watching his father struggle without healthcare benefits, that childhood pain became his why, creating a company that treated employees as partners with full benefits. This wasn't corporate strategy, it was personal mission translated into business practice. When leaders operate from this authentic place, their decisions carry conviction that others can feel. The problem is, most people confuse their role with their purpose. Your title describes your function, but your why explains your motivation. A hospital administrator might manage budgets and schedules, but their deeper purpose could be ensuring families never lose hope during medical crises. This distinction matters because purpose provides the emotional fuel needed during difficult periods when logic alone isn't sufficient. Jim Collins discovered through extensive research that Level 5 leaders, those who build enduring great companies, all possessed what he called professional will, rooted in something larger than personal ambition. They weren't the loudest or most charismatic leaders, but they had crystal-clear understanding of their fundamental beliefs about what needed to exist in the world. Purpose discovery requires honest introspection about your core values. Brené Brown suggests examining moments when you felt most alive and engaged at work. What were you doing? What values were being honored? These peak experiences often reveal patterns pointing toward your authentic motivations. The exercise isn't comfortable because it demands vulnerability and truthful self-assessment. Leaders operating without clear purpose make inconsistent decisions that confuse their teams. They chase every opportunity, change directions frequently, and struggle to inspire genuine commitment. Simon Sinek observed that purpose-driven leaders naturally attract others who share similar beliefs, creating stronger, more cohesive organizations. When your why is clear, your what and how align naturally, creating the authentic leadership presence that transforms both leaders and followers. Your purpose isn't found through intellectual analysis alone. It emerges through reflection on the experiences that shaped your deepest convictions about how the world should work. Part 3. When vision meets reality. Most leaders fail because they treat vision like a beautiful painting meant for display rather than a construction blueprint meant for building. The moment you commit to turning your purpose into reality, you enter the messiest phase of leadership, where grand ideas collide headfirst with stubborn obstacles. Reed Hastings learned this lesson painfully when Netflix faced the Quickster disaster in 2011. His vision of streaming dominance was clear, but his execution nearly destroyed customer trust overnight. The gap between his forward-thinking strategy and what customers could accept at that moment created a crisis that required immediate course correction. Hastings discovered that vision without timing and gradual implementation becomes organizational chaos. Jim Collins found that truly great companies bridge this gap through what he calls disciplined action. They maintain unwavering faith in their ultimate destination while adapting their methods continuously. Southwest Airlines exemplifies this approach perfectly. Their vision of democratizing air travel remained constant for decades, but they adjusted routes, pricing strategies, and service offerings based on market realities and customer feedback. The brutal truth about implementing vision is that your initial plan will always be wrong in some significant way. Amazon's Jeff Bezos understood this deeply, describing their approach as stubborn on vision, flexible on details. When Amazon Web Services launched, it looked nothing like Bezos originally envisioned, but it served the same fundamental purpose of becoming Earth's most customer-centric company. Smart leaders build what Brené Brown calls rumbling skills into their vision implementation. They create space for honest conversations about what's working and what isn't. They admit when assumptions prove incorrect and pivot quickly without abandoning their core purpose. This requires the humility to acknowledge that your team might see implementation challenges more clearly than you do. The most successful vision implementation happens through small, consistent actions rather than dramatic announcements. Tony Hsieh at Zappos didn't transform company culture overnight. He implemented daily practices, hired for cultural fit, and reinforced values through countless small decisions until the vision became embedded in how people naturally worked. Your vision gains credibility through early wins that prove the concept works in practice. Start with pilot programs, test assumptions on small scales, and build momentum through demonstrated results rather than inspiring speeches alone. Part 4. The Power of Belief. When Howard Schultz announced Starbucks would hire 10,000 refugees, his board worried about customer backlash and financial risk. Schultz didn't waver because his belief ran deeper than quarterly profits. He believed companies should stand for something beyond shareholder returns. And this conviction transformed how employees viewed their workplace. Within months, Starbucks saw increased employee engagement scores and attracted talent who wanted to work for an organization with strong values. This illustrates a fundamental truth about leadership. Your beliefs don't just guide your decisions, they become contagious, spreading through your organization and shaping how others approach their work. When leaders possess genuine conviction about their mission, it creates what psychologists call emotional contagion, where team members unconsciously adopt similar attitudes and energy levels. Sarah Blakely's unwavering belief in democratizing shapewear drove Spanx from a $5,000 startup to a billion-dollar company. Despite facing countless rejections from manufacturers and retailers, her conviction never faltered. She genuinely believed every woman deserved to feel confident, and this belief sustained her through 2 years of door-to-door sales pitches. Her employees absorbed this conviction, turning customer service into a mission rather than a job function. Research by Stanford's Chip Heath shows that teams led by highly convicted leaders perform 23% better under pressure than those with uncertain leadership. The reason is simple. Belief creates psychological safety. When your team sees you confidently moving forward despite obstacles, they feel permission to take calculated risks and push through difficult periods. However, belief becomes dangerous when it crosses into blind certainty. Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes believed so deeply in her vision that she ignored scientific evidence and ethical boundaries. Her conviction inspired initial followers, but ultimately destroyed the company because she refused feedback that challenged her assumptions. The most effective leaders balance strong conviction with intellectual humility. Jeff Bezos demonstrates this perfectly at Amazon. He holds firm beliefs about customer obsession while remaining disagree and commit, flexible on implementation details. When presented with data contradicting his assumptions, he adjusts tactics while maintaining strategic conviction. Your beliefs shape not just what you do, but how intensely your team pursues shared goals. Mark Benioff's belief in equality drove Salesforce to conduct pay equity audits, spending millions to eliminate gender wage gaps. This conviction attracted top talent who shared similar values, creating competitive advantages through cultural alignment. The key is ensuring your beliefs serve the mission rather than your ego. Chapter 2. Building Trust and Teams. Part 1. Trust begins with listening. Howard Schultz walked through Starbucks stores every day, not to check on employees, but to hear what they had to say. This simple practice transformed a small coffee company into a global phenomenon. The secret wasn't his vision alone. It was his willingness to listen first, then lead. Most leaders think trust comes from having all the answers. Research from Harvard Business School shows the opposite. Teams trust leaders who ask questions more than those who give orders. When Microsoft's Satya Nadella took over as CEO, he spent his first months listening to thousands of employees across all levels. This listening tour revealed that Microsoft's culture was broken. People felt unheard and undervalued. By acting on what he heard, Nadella rebuilt trust and turned around the company's performance. Active listening requires specific techniques that many leaders skip. Start with open-ended questions like, "What would make your job easier?" instead of, "Are you happy with the new process?" The difference matters. Open questions invite stories, while closed questions shut down conversation. When someone shares a concern, resist the urge to fix it immediately. Instead, repeat back what you heard. It sounds like you're worried about meeting the deadline because the requirements keep changing. This shows you're truly paying attention. Buffer, the social media management company, practices radical transparency by sharing employee feedback publicly. CEO Joel Gascoigne learned that ignoring feedback destroys trust faster than any single decision. When team members raised concerns about remote work policies, he didn't just acknowledge them, he changed the policies based on their input. The result? Buffer consistently ranks among the best places to work. The cost of not listening shows up in every industry. Yahoo's leadership ignored employee warnings about competition from Google and Facebook. Radio Shack executives dismissed customer complaints about their outdated stores. Both companies collapsed, partly because leaders stopped hearing what people were trying to tell them. Great leaders treat listening as their primary job. They create space for difficult conversations, ask follow-up questions, and take action on what they learn. When people feel heard, they don't just trust you with information, they trust you with their commitment and creativity. This transforms ordinary teams into extraordinary ones, but only when listening becomes a practice, not just a policy. Part 2. Leading by example. When Southwest Airlines CEO Herb Kelleher showed up to work wearing shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, employees thought he'd lost his mind. But Kelleher wasn't having a midlife crisis. He was demonstrating the company's core value of keeping things fun and approachable. His casual dress became legendary, and employees followed suit by creating an airline culture where work felt joyful rather than stuffy. Actions speak so loudly that people can't hear what you're saying. This old saying proves true every single day in organizations worldwide. Leaders who talk about integrity while cutting ethical corners create cynical teams. Leaders who preach innovation while punishing every failure kill creativity. But leaders who live their values create something remarkable, teams that believe and act accordingly. Consider Paul Pullman, former CEO at Unilever. When he decided the company would focus on sustainable living, he didn't just announce it in a boardroom. He stopped taking bonuses tied to short-term stock performance. He eliminated quarterly earnings guidance. He personally visited factories to ensure environmental standards were met. Employees watched their CEO sacrifice personal financial gain for long-term principles. The result? Unilever became a global leader in sustainable business practices, with employees who genuinely believed in their mission. Your daily habits matter more than your annual speeches. Howard Schultz of Starbucks proved this by personally visiting stores, learning baristas' names, and working behind the counter during busy periods. He didn't delegate employee engagement, he lived it. When Schultz returned to CEO duties in 2008 during the company's struggles, he closed 7,100 stores for 3 hours to retrain baristas on coffee quality. That single decision cost millions, but demonstrated his commitment to excellence. Employees saw their leader prioritize craft over profit, and the company's culture shifted accordingly. The ripple effect of authentic leadership spreads faster than gossip. When leaders consistently match their actions to their words, something interesting happens. Employees stop watching for contradictions and start focusing on results. Teams begin policing themselves because they've internalized the standards their leader demonstrates. Trust replaces surveillance. Take time to examine your own daily choices. Do you arrive early or rush in late? Do you listen fully during meetings or check your phone? Do you admit mistakes or deflect blame? Your team notices everything, and they're deciding whether to follow your example or ignore it entirely. Part 3. Courage over comfort. Every leader faces a moment when their stomach tightens, their palms sweat, and a voice whispers, "Just take the easy way out." Howard Schultz felt this exact sensation in 2008 when he returned as CEO of Starbucks. The company was hemorrhaging money, closing stores, and laying off thousands of employees. The comfortable choice would have been incremental changes, quiet cost-cutting, and hoping for the best. Instead, Schultz made the gut-wrenching decision to close 7,100 U.S. stores for 3 hours to retrain every barista. The move cost millions and drew fierce criticism from investors, who called it reckless. But here's what happened next. Those 3 hours transformed how employees felt about their work. Sales began climbing within months. The bold move signaled that leadership cared more about quality and people than short-term profits. Courage had trumped comfort, and the results spoke volumes. Most leadership failures stem from choosing comfort over courage. We avoid difficult conversations with underperforming team members. We stay silent when we see problems brewing. We postpone decisions that might ruffle feathers. Each time we choose the comfortable path, we erode our credibility bit by bit. Kim Scott, author of Radical Candor, discovered this truth the hard way at Google. She had an employee who wasn't meeting expectations. but she kept giving vague, positive feedback because direct criticism felt uncomfortable. Months later, the employee was fired by someone else. Scott realized her kindness had actually been cruel. She'd robbed this person of the chance to improve. Building courage starts small. Begin with micro-brave acts daily. Speak up in meetings when you disagree. Give specific feedback instead of generic praise. Admit when you don't know something. Each small act builds your courage muscle for bigger moments. Brené Brown's research reveals something counterintuitive about courageous leaders. They're not fearless. They feel fear just like everyone else. The difference is they act despite the fear, not in its absence. They've learned that discomfort signals growth opportunities. The best leaders create cultures where courage becomes contagious. They reward people who surface problems early rather than hiding them. They celebrate thoughtful risk-taking even when it doesn't pan out. They ask tough questions publicly, modeling the behavior they want to see. Consider this question: what uncomfortable conversation are you avoiding right now? That avoidance is likely costing you more than the temporary discomfort of addressing it directly. Your team is watching to see if you'll choose the brave path or the easy one. Part 4. Safe Spaces for Growth. When Amy Edmondson walked into Harvard Business School's research lab in 1996, she expected to find a clear correlation. Better teams make fewer mistakes. Instead, her data showed something baffling. The highest-performing medical teams were reporting more errors, not fewer. This discovery changed everything we know about team dynamics and led to one of the most important concepts in modern leadership research. Those high-performing teams weren't actually making more mistakes. They were simply safe enough to admit them. The difference between mediocre teams and exceptional ones wasn't skill or intelligence. It was psychological safety. The shared belief that team members could speak up, ask questions, and make mistakes without fear of punishment or humiliation. Google discovered this same principle during their Project Aristotle study. After analyzing hundreds of teams, they found that psychological safety was the single most important factor in team effectiveness. Not talent, not resources, not even clear goals. Safety came first, and everything else followed. Think about your own workplace for a moment. How often do you hold back a question because you worry it might sound stupid? How many times have you noticed a problem but stayed quiet because you didn't want to rock the boat? That hesitation costs organizations billions of dollars every year in missed opportunities and preventable failures. Creating psychological safety isn't about being nice or avoiding difficult conversations. It's about establishing clear boundaries around respect while encouraging honest dialogue. Leaders who excel at this understand that failure is data, not a character flaw. They ask questions like, "What did we learn?" instead of "Who screwed up?" Consider how Satya Nadella transformed Microsoft's culture after becoming CEO in 2014. He replaced the company's competitive, know-it-all culture with a learn-it-all mindset. Employees stopped hiding mistakes and started sharing them as learning opportunities. The result? Microsoft's market value tripled under his leadership. The most powerful tool for building psychological safety is surprisingly simple: genuine curiosity. When team members bring problems, successful leaders respond with questions before solutions. They say things like, "Tell me more about that," or "What else should I be considering?" This approach signals that diverse perspectives are valued, not just compliance. Your role as a leader isn't to have all the answers. It's to create an environment where the best answers can emerge from anywhere in your organization. Chapter 3. Navigating Change, Part 1. Embracing the Unknown. The moment Reed Hastings announced Netflix would split into two companies in 2011, customers revolted. Over 800,000 subscribers canceled within months. Stock prices plummeted 60%. Critics called it corporate suicide. Yet Hastings knew something his customers didn't see yet. The future belonged to streaming, not DVDs. His willingness to face customer anger and financial loss during this transition transformed Netflix into the entertainment giant we know today. This story reveals something crucial about change. The leaders who thrive during uncertainty aren't the ones who avoid discomfort. They're the ones who lean into it deliberately. Think about uncertainty like walking into a dark room. Most people freeze at the doorway, waiting for someone to turn on the lights. But successful leaders start moving forward, feeling their way along the walls. They know that standing still in the doorway keeps them stuck forever. Consider how Sarah Blakely approached building Spanx. When department stores rejected her product, she didn't retreat. Instead, she stood in Neiman Marcus for hours, demonstrating her pantyhose to confuse shoppers. Each rejection taught her something new about her market. She treated every no as research data rather than personal failure. Your brain naturally resists change because it requires more energy than following familiar patterns. But you can retrain this response. Start by reframing challenges as experiments rather than threats. When Satya Nadella became Microsoft's CEO in 2014, he inherited a company losing relevance in mobile and cloud computing. Instead of defending old strategies, he admitted their limitations publicly. He told employees, "We need to learn it all again." This mindset shift changed everything. Microsoft embraced partnerships with former competitors like Apple. They moved from protecting Windows to empowering productivity across all platforms. Revenue grew from $86 billion to over $160 billion during Nadella's first 7 years. The key lies in staying curious about outcomes rather than attached to specific methods. When circumstances shift around you, ask different questions. Instead of, "How do we get back to normal?" try, "What opportunities does this situation create?" This simple reframe opens possibilities that anxiety closes off. Practice makes this easier. Start small by changing minor routines deliberately. Take different routes to work. Order unfamiliar menu items. These tiny experiments build your comfort with uncertainty without major consequences. Part 2. Learning from setbacks. When Dyson launched its first bagless vacuum cleaner in 1993, the company had already endured 5,126 failed prototypes. James Dyson could have stopped at failure number 1,000, or 3,000, or even 5,000. But he understood something crucial about setbacks that many leaders miss entirely. Dyson treated each failure as data, not defeat. He documented what went wrong, why it happened, and what to try next. This systematic approach to failure transforms setbacks from roadblocks into stepping stones. Today, Dyson's company generates over $6 billion in annual revenue, built on a foundation of methodical failure analysis. The same principle applies to every leader facing adversity. Reed Hastings learned this lesson painfully in 2011 when Netflix announced Quickster, a plan to split their streaming and DVD services. Customer outrage was immediate and brutal. The company lost 800,000 subscribers in 3 months, and stock prices plummeted 77%. Instead of defending the decision, Hastings did something remarkable. He publicly admitted the mistake, explained what they learned, and pivoted quickly. Netflix abandoned Quickster within weeks and refocused entirely on streaming. That seeming catastrophe became the catalyst for Netflix's transformation into the streaming giant we know today. The key lies in how leaders frame setbacks for their teams. When Airbnb faced near bankruptcy in 2008, founders Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia sold novelty cereal boxes to stay afloat. They could have hidden this desperate move from employees. Instead, they displayed those cereal boxes in their office as reminders that resourcefulness matters more than perfection. This transparency created psychological safety within their organization. Team members felt comfortable taking calculated risks because they saw leadership model resilience rather than infallibility. Employees began sharing their own failed experiments openly, accelerating collective learning across the company. Smart leaders establish what Amazon calls failure celebration. They regularly ask teams, "What did we try that didn't work? What did we learn? How can we apply these insights moving forward? This shifts organizational culture from blame-based to learning-based. The fastest way to extract value from setbacks involves three simple questions. What specifically went wrong? What factors contributed to this outcome? What would we do differently next time? Howard Schultz used this framework when Starbucks nearly collapsed during the 2008 recession, closing 600 stores and laying off thousands. Rather than hiding from the crisis, Schultz held company-wide meetings where he shared exactly what went wrong and how they would rebuild. He acknowledged his own mistakes in expanding too quickly and losing focus on customer experience. This honest reflection rallied employees around a clear recovery plan that ultimately strengthened the company. Part 3. Becoming adaptable. Most successful adaptations happen when leaders stop trying to predict the future and start building systems that respond to it. Reed Hastings at Netflix demonstrated this principle when he made the controversial decision to split DVD and streaming services in 2011. Despite massive customer backlash and a 77% stock price drop, building adaptable organizations requires what researchers call sensing mechanisms, simple ways to detect change early. Amazon uses a quarterly review process where teams present three things: what's working, what's breaking, and what customers are asking for that doesn't exist yet. This creates a constant feedback loop that prevents blindness to shifting conditions. The key difference between rigid and flexible leaders lies in their relationship with their original plans. Adaptive leaders treat plans like rough sketches rather than architectural blueprints. When Satya Nadella became Microsoft's CEO in 2014, he inherited a company losing relevance in mobile and cloud computing. Instead of defending existing strategies, he asked one simple question: what do our customers need that we're not providing? This question led Microsoft to partner with Apple on Office for iPad, despite decades of rivalry. The move seemed crazy to many employees, but it generated $1.5 billion in revenue within 2 years. Nadella's approach demonstrates how adaptable leaders separate ego from strategy. Creating adaptability in teams requires what Jim Collins calls confronting brutal facts while maintaining unwavering faith in ultimate success. This means establishing regular forums where people can speak honestly about problems without fear of punishment. At Patagonia, monthly town halls allow any employee to challenge company direction or suggest pivots based on environmental changes. The fastest way to build team adaptability involves three practices that successful leaders use consistently. First, they rotate people through different roles regularly, preventing skill silos that make change harder. Second, they celebrate intelligent failures, mistakes that taught valuable lessons about market conditions or customer needs. Third, they maintain what researchers call option value, keeping multiple small experiments running so the organization can scale successful approaches quickly. When resistance to change emerges, adaptive leaders don't fight it directly. Instead, they involve resistors in designing solutions. During Southwest Airlines' expansion into international markets, many employees worried about losing the company's casual culture. Leadership created cross-functional teams that included skeptics to develop new procedures, transforming opponents into advocates. The most adaptable organizations share one counterintuitive trait: they change constantly in small ways to avoid massive disruptions later. This prevents the shock that comes from sudden, dramatic pivots and builds change capability as an organizational muscle rather than an emergency response. Part 4. Vision beyond the finish line. Great leaders know that crossing the finish line is not the finish line. When Reed Hastings celebrated Netflix's dominance in DVD rentals, he simultaneously began planning the company's transformation into streaming. While competitors celebrated their victories, Hastings was already 3 moves ahead, recognizing that today's success could become tomorrow's anchor. The most dangerous moment for any leader occurs immediately after achieving a major goal. Success breeds comfort, and comfort breeds complacency. Jim Collins discovered this pattern while researching companies that fell from greatness. Circuit City dominated electronics retail for years, then stopped evolving. Blockbuster owned video rental, then ignored streaming. Their leaders confused reaching the summit with owning the mountain. Think of vision like a telescope that never stops extending. When Walt Disney opened Disneyland in 1955, he didn't sit back and admire his achievement. Instead, he immediately began sketching plans for Disney World, Epcot, and entertainment experiences that wouldn't exist for decades. Disney understood that the moment you stop imagining what's next, your current success starts expiring. Amazon's Jeff Bezos mastered this principle by treating every quarterly earnings call as a progress report towards something bigger. When Amazon dominated online retail, Bezos was building cloud computing infrastructure. When AWS became profitable, he was already investing in artificial intelligence and space exploration. Each milestone became a platform for the next leap. The most effective leaders develop what Simon Sinek calls an infinite mindset. They play not to win individual games, but to keep playing forever. This requires constantly asking one question: what capabilities do we need to build today for challenges we can't yet see? Consider how Southwest Airlines approaches this thinking. Every route expansion, every operational improvement, every cultural initiative gets evaluated against their long-term vision of democratizing air travel. They don't just measure quarterly profits. They measure progress toward making flying accessible to more people. Legacy thinking transforms how leaders make decisions. When you're building something meant to outlast your tenure, short-term pressures lose their grip. You invest in developing successors, create systems that function without you, and make choices based on what serves the mission rather than what serves your ego. The best leaders become teachers, actively preparing others to carry the vision forward. They share not just what they know, but how they think. This isn't about succession planning, it's about vision multiplication. Chapter 4, Turning Vision into Impact, Part 1, Setting Intentional Goals. Most leaders fail because they treat goal setting like writing a grocery list, when it should work more like programming a GPS for the most important journey of their lives. When Reed Hastings set Netflix's goal to shift from DVD rentals to streaming, employees thought he was crazy. The goal seemed impossible in 2007, but Hastings did something most leaders never do. He made the goal so specific that every team member could see their exact role in achieving it. Engineering teams knew they needed to build streaming infrastructure. Content teams understood they had to secure digital rights. Marketing teams recognized they would educate customers about a completely new service. The magic happened because Hastings translated a massive vision into bite-sized pieces that people could actually work on every day. This is where most visions die, in the gap between the big idea and the daily tasks. Think about your own experience. When someone tells you to be more productive, you probably feel overwhelmed. But when they say, answer emails within 2 hours, you know exactly what to do. The same principle applies to organizational goals. Jim Collins discovered that companies jumping from good to great shared one trait. They set what he called 20-mile marches. Southwest Airlines committed to flying specific routes profitably before expanding. This wasn't about limiting ambition. It was about creating stepping stones people could actually reach. The most effective goal setters use what Daniel Pink calls the Goldilocks principle. Goals that are neither too easy nor impossibly hard, but just right for stretching capabilities. Google's famous OKRs, objectives and key results, work because they follow this principle. When teams achieve 60 to 70% of their ambitious goals, Google considers this success. But here's what separates real leaders from dreamers. They build feedback loops into every goal. Blakely revised Spanx's expansion goals 3 times in the first year based on customer feedback. Each adjustment brought the company closer to its ultimate vision while keeping goals realistic. Smart leaders also connect every goal to the bigger purpose. When employees at Patagonia work on reducing packaging waste, they understand how this specific task serves the company's environmental mission. This connection transforms routine work into meaningful contribution. The key is treating goals like living documents, not carved stone tablets. Amazon's leadership principles include disagree and commit, which means teams can adjust goals when evidence suggests a better path. This flexibility keeps organizations moving toward their vision without getting trapped by outdated plans. Remember, goals should inspire action, not paralysis. If your team can't explain how their daily work connects to your vision, the problem isn't their understanding, it's your goal setting. Part 2. Actions speak louder. Talk is free, but execution costs everything. At Tesla, when Elon Musk declared the company would produce 500,000 cars annually by 2018, his team didn't just nod and create PowerPoints. They worked brutal 12-hour shifts, slept on factory floors, and rebuilt production lines by hand when automation failed. Most leaders get comfortable in the planning phase. Strategy sessions feel productive. Whiteboard discussions generate energy. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Markets reward action, not intentions. Netflix didn't become a streaming giant by perfecting their business plan. Reed Hastings launched with 925 titles when competitors had thousands, then improved through execution. The difference between visionary leaders and dreamers lies in their relationship with imperfection. Brené Brown's research shows that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling afraid and moving forward anyway. At Southwest Airlines, Herb Kelleher didn't wait for perfect market conditions. He started with one route between Dallas and Houston, then expanded based on what worked. Consider how Amazon approaches this. Jeff Bezos instituted day one thinking, treating every day like a startup. When they launched Prime, the economics looked terrible. 2-day shipping for $79 annually seemed impossible to profitable. But they moved anyway, iterating based on customer response rather than spreadsheet projections. The momentum principle works like physics. Objects at rest stay at rest. Teams discussing strategy for months develop analysis paralysis. Jim Collins found that great companies share one trait. They take consistent action while maintaining long-term vision. They understand that perfect plans executed poorly lose to mediocre plans executed excellently. Speed matters more than most leaders realize. When Brian Chesky started Airbnb, he didn't build a perfect platform. He photographed apartments himself, knocked on doors, and personally managed bookings. This hands-on approach revealed customer needs that no amount of market research could uncover. Smart leaders create forcing functions. At General Electric, Jack Welch implemented workout sessions where teams had to present solutions within days, not months. This urgency prevented endless committee discussions and forced practical problem-solving. The execution test is simple. Can someone outside your organization understand what you're actually doing? If your vision requires lengthy explanations, you're probably overthinking instead of acting. Real progress happens when teams stop preparing to begin and simply begin. Part 3. Prioritizing progress. Most leaders fail because they chase perfect results instead of steady movement forward. When Reid Hoffman launched LinkedIn, the platform looked nothing like today's polished network. Early users complained about clunky features and limited functionality. Instead of waiting for perfection, Hoffman's team released weekly updates, each solving one small problem. They tracked daily signups rather than quarterly revenue projections. This approach built the world's largest professional network through thousands of tiny improvements. Progress beats perfection every time because momentum creates more momentum. At Toyota, factory workers can stop the entire production line when they spot a defect. This seems counterproductive until you realize the company produces some of the world's most reliable cars. They celebrate finding problems early rather than punishing mistakes. Each stopped line represents progress toward better quality. Smart organizations measure movement, not milestones. Spotify tracks how quickly teams can release new features, not whether those features immediately succeed. Their squads deploy code multiple times daily, learning from each release. When a feature fails, they pivot within days rather than months. This rapid iteration helped them compete against Apple Music despite having fewer resources. Regular reflection separates growing teams from stagnant ones. Amazon's Jeff Bezos instituted 2-pizza meetings, where teams small enough to share 2 pizzas review weekly progress. These sessions focus on one question: what did we learn this week that changes our approach next week? No lengthy presentations or detailed reports, just honest conversation about what worked and what didn't. Transparency accelerates progress because hidden problems become bigger problems. Buffer, the social media scheduling company, publishes their revenue numbers, employee salaries, and diversity statistics online for everyone to see. This radical openness forces them to address issues quickly. When growth stalled in 2016, their public metrics showed the problem immediately. Within months, they had pivoted their product strategy and recovered. Small wins matter more than big victories because they happen more often. When IBM was struggling in the 1990s, Lou Gerstner didn't promise dramatic transformation. Instead, he celebrated when individual departments reduced customer response time by a few hours. These incremental improvements eventually saved the company. People need frequent proof that their efforts create change. The best leaders treat bottlenecks like gold mines. Every slowdown reveals where improvement will have maximum impact. Southwest Airlines discovered that plane cleaning was their biggest delay factor. Instead of hiring more cleaners, they redesigned the process so passengers helped. Simple changes like removing seatback magazines reduced turnaround time by 15 minutes per flight. Progress requires admitting when plans aren't working. Netflix abandoned their DVD by mail model at its peak profitability because streaming showed better long-term potential. They disrupted themselves before competitors could. This willingness to change course when evidence pointed elsewhere kept them relevant while Blockbuster disappeared. Organizations that prioritize progress over perfection adapt faster to changing conditions. They build learning into their culture rather than just planning. When unexpected challenges arise, these teams already know how to adjust quickly because they practice adjustment constantly. Part 4. Leaving a lasting legacy. The true test of visionary leadership isn't what happens while you're in charge. It's what endures after you leave. The most powerful leaders build something bigger than themselves, creating systems and cultures that continue growing long after their departure. Ray Kroc understood this principle when building McDonald's. He didn't just create a restaurant chain. He built a system that could replicate his vision worldwide. Kroc spent years developing detailed operating manuals, training programs, and quality standards. He hired people who believed in the vision, then taught them to teach others. When Kroc stepped back, McDonald's didn't stumble because the vision lived in every procedure, every training session, and every franchise owner. Disney operates on the same principle. Walt Disney died in 1966, yet his vision of magical experiences continues shaping every decision at the company. Disney embeds storytelling and wonder into hiring practices, employee training, and daily operations. New employees learn Disney's history and values before they learn their specific jobs. This isn't coincidence. It's intentional legacy building. The most effective leaders act like master gardeners rather than star performers. They plant seeds in other people, nurturing growth that continues after they're gone. Southwest Airlines founder Herb Kelleher spent decades mentoring employees who later became leaders themselves. These individuals didn't just copy his methods, they absorbed his principles and adapted them to new challenges. Creating lasting impact requires embedding vision into three critical areas: people, processes, and principles. Start with people by identifying potential leaders early and investing in their development. Share decision-making responsibilities while explaining the reasoning behind choices. Let them make mistakes and learn from them while you're still there to guide recovery. Document your processes, but don't stop at procedures. Explain the why behind each system. When Southwest Airlines writes customer service guidelines, they include stories about legendary service moments. These narratives help employees understand the spirit behind the rules, making them more likely to adapt appropriately in new situations. Finally, codify your principles into organizational DNA. Jim Collins found that companies with enduring success had core values that transcended individual leaders. These principles guided decisions during leadership transitions and market changes. They became the organization's compass when circumstances demanded new directions. Legacy isn't built through grand gestures. It grows through consistent daily choices that prioritize long-term impact over short-term recognition. Chapter 5, Growing with Purpose, Part 1, Finding Inspiration Daily. When tennis champion Novak Djokovic restructured his daily routine around meditation and gratitude practices in 2011, few expected it would transform him into one of the sport's greatest champions. Most leaders wait for lightning strike moments of inspiration, but the most effective ones create daily systems that feed their sense of purpose. Howard Schultz of Starbucks famously started each morning walking through different neighborhoods, observing how people interacted with coffee shops. These walks weren't just exercise. They became his primary source of ideas that eventually shaped Starbucks into a global community hub rather than just a coffee retailer. The science behind daily inspiration is surprisingly practical. Research from Harvard Business School shows that people who spend just 10 minutes each morning writing about their core values perform 40% better on subsequent tasks. This isn't about positive thinking. It's about reconnecting with what drives you before the day's chaos begins. Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx, built her billion-dollar company around a simple daily habit: asking what frustrated me yesterday during her commute. This question transformed ordinary annoyances into business opportunities. When she noticed women cutting the feet-off pantyhose to create smoother silhouettes under white pants, that frustration became her company's foundation. The most inspiring leaders treat curiosity like a muscle that needs daily exercise. Reed Hastings of Netflix requires himself to learn something completely new each week, from pottery to coding languages he'll never use professionally. This deliberate exposure to unfamiliar concepts keeps his thinking flexible and generates unexpected connections that benefit his company's strategy. Gratitude practices work differently than most people expect. Instead of generic appreciation, effective leaders focus on specific moments when their values aligned with their actions. Mark Benioff of Salesforce keeps a daily journal noting when he witnessed or participated in acts that reflected his company's values of equality and community service. This practice doesn't just make him feel good, it reinforces the behaviors that built his company's distinctive culture. Creating inspiration-rich environments requires intentional design. Melinda French Gates restructured her office to include artifacts from people whose lives were changed by her foundation's work. These weren't decorative items, but daily reminders of why her work matters. When difficult decisions arise, these physical touchstones help her reconnect with her deeper purpose. The key insight successful leaders understand is that inspiration isn't something you find. It's something you deliberately cultivate through consistent practices that keep you connected to your evolving sense of purpose. Part 2. Uplifting Others. The most successful leaders don't just climb the ladder themselves, they turn around and extend their hand to pull others up with them. Mark Benioff, Salesforce's founder, discovered this truth early in his career. Instead of hoarding knowledge and opportunities, he created what he called V2 Mom meetings. Sessions dedicated entirely to helping team members define their own vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures. What started as a management tool became something more powerful, a systematic way to help every person see their potential and chart their path forward. When you genuinely invest in someone else's growth, something remarkable happens. They don't just perform better, they become champions of your shared mission. Oprah Winfrey built her media empire on this principle. She consistently spotlighted emerging talent, provided platforms for unknown voices, and celebrated others' achievements as enthusiastically as her own. Her producers, writers, and on-air personalities didn't just work for her. They became extensions of her vision to educate and inspire. The science backs this up. Gallup's research spanning 2 decades shows that teams with managers who focus on strengths development see 67% higher engagement rates. But here's what the data doesn't capture. When you help someone discover what they're naturally good at, you're not just improving performance, you're helping them connect with their own sense of purpose. Sarah Blakely, Spanx founder, institutionalized this through what she calls failure parties. When team members took risks that didn't pan out, she celebrated the attempt. This wasn't empty cheerleading, it was strategic culture building. She understood that innovation requires people willing to stretch beyond their comfort zones, and that happens only when they feel supported, even when things go wrong. Creating meaningful opportunities for others requires shifting from asking, "How can this person help me?" to "How can I help this person become who they're meant to be?" Amazon's Jeff Bezos implemented this through his disagree and commit principle. He regularly gave team members authority to pursue ideas he personally disagreed with, trusting their expertise and giving them space to prove their vision. The feedback systems that work best aren't annual reviews or formal evaluations. They're ongoing conversations rooted in genuine curiosity about each person's growth. When you help others succeed, you don't diminish your own light. You multiply it across your entire organization. Part 3. Balancing challenge and care. The best leaders walk a tightrope between pushing people to excel and making them feel genuinely cared for. Think about it like being a great coach. You wouldn't coddle a star athlete before the Olympics, but you also wouldn't destroy their confidence. The magic happens when people know you believe in them completely while still demanding their best work. This balance creates what researchers call psychological safety, combined with high standards, a combination that produces extraordinary results. Reed Hastings at Netflix mastered this approach through what he calls keeper test culture. He regularly tells employees that Netflix is like a professional sports team, not a family. This sounds harsh, but here's the twist. He invests heavily in employee development, pays top market rates, and gives people freedom to make decisions. When someone isn't performing, he has direct conversations about improvement rather than letting problems fester. People know exactly where they stand, which actually reduces anxiety. The key is being tough on standards while being gentle on people. When Satya Nadella became Microsoft's CEO, he inherited a culture known for brutal internal competition. He kept the high-performance expectations, but changed how feedback was delivered. Instead of public rankings that humiliated underperformers, he introduced growth conversations focused on learning from mistakes. Revenue increased by 167% during his first 5 years. Here's what this looks like in practice. You set challenging goals, but also ask, what support do you need to succeed? You give honest feedback, but frame it around the person's potential. You celebrate effort and learning, not just outcomes. When someone struggles, you explore whether it's a skill gap, resource issue, or wrong fit, rather than assuming they're not trying hard enough. Brené Brown's research shows that people perform best when they feel both challenged and supported. She calls this brave leadership, having difficult conversations while maintaining dignity and respect. The most successful teams have leaders who say things like, "I believe you can do this, and here's what needs to improve," rather than either avoiding tough conversations or delivering them without compassion. The exercise that works best is asking yourself before every interaction, am I being clear about expectations? And am I showing that I care about this person's success? Both questions must have yes answers. Part 4. Leading for Tomorrow. When Reed Hastings tells people Netflix started as a DVD by mail company, many forget he was already thinking about streaming in 1997, 2 years before most people owned high-speed internet. That's what separating today's successful leaders from those who struggle looks like. Future-focused leaders don't just react to changes. They spot patterns before they become obvious. Andy Grove from Intel called this strategic inflection points, moments when fundamental assumptions about business shift. He survived multiple technology waves by constantly asking his team what would kill Intel tomorrow. This question became part of their weekly meetings. The trick isn't predicting the future perfectly. Nobody can do that. Instead, effective leaders create what Jim Collins calls productive paranoia. They assume their industry will change dramatically and prepare multiple responses. Southwest Airlines survived every airline industry crisis since 1971 because they always kept cash reserves and maintained the same low-cost strategy regardless of economic conditions. Building tomorrow's capabilities requires investing in people today. Satya Nadella transformed Microsoft by shifting from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. When he became CEO in 2014, Microsoft was losing relevance fast. Instead of firing everyone and starting over, he invested heavily in employee learning programs. Microsoft's stock price increased 500% in 6 years because their people could adapt to cloud computing and AI trends. The most important skill for future leadership is teaching others to think ahead. Ray Dalio at Bridgewater Associates made this systematic. Every employee learns to identify patterns and make predictions about their work area. They track their accuracy over time. This creates an entire organization that thinks like futurists rather than just one visionary leader at the top. Legacy-minded leaders also focus on building systems that work without them. Amazon's Jeff Bezos spent decades creating processes and principles that could guide decisions when he wasn't involved. His Day One philosophy and customer obsession principles still drive Amazon decisions years after his departure from daily operations. The company continues growing because the thinking patterns are embedded in how they work. What separates truly adaptive leaders is their willingness to abandon successful strategies when circumstances change. Netflix killed their profitable DVD business to focus on streaming. Bezos shut down profitable projects that didn't fit Amazon's long-term direction. These decisions felt risky at the time, but created the space needed for bigger opportunities. The future rewards leaders who stay curious, keep learning, and help their teams do the same.